Lawyers of Reddit, what case do you wish you had never won? Before taking my bar exam in Germany, I worked as a law apprentice at a small law firm. There was one case assigned to me because it was considered unwinnable, but the client was determined to proceed. The case involved an elderly woman who had sold her cat because she was too ill to care for it. Our client, a wealthy woman, bought the cat and immediately took it to the vet. It turned out the cat needed surgeries costing around $2,000. Our client hired us to recover that amount from the elderly seller. The buyer was an unpleasant woman, showing no remorse or sympathy. She was fully aware of the seller's condition, since she had informed us about it herself. Despite the weak position our client had, we won the case quickly. I used to prosecute neglect cases in a large American city for child protection services. After several high-profile cases where children tragically died due to family neglect, CPS began filing charges against almost everyone. I understand their reasoning, but I wish they had resisted negative publicity instead of letting it influence their decisions on who to take to court. From then on, I handled many cases where, although legally valid, I felt uneasy winning. Not a lawyer, but when I worked as a paralegal, my boss got a sex offender acquitted of the most serious charge, first-degree sexual assault, even though we had a confession. The confession was locked in the lawyer's desk drawer during the trial. The lawyer had me, a woman in my 20s at the time, sit next to the defendant so the jury would see I wasn't afraid of him. The defendant insisted on testifying, and during his testimony, I looked at his wife, whose face showed horror. She, who knew him best, realized he was lying. Up until then, she seemed to believe his claim that the teenage victim was just after his money. I felt disgusted afterward and switched to a real estate and refinancing law firm. I know the question calls for such stories, and I don't know if it's my place to judge, but I think you could have chosen not to protect a rapist and instead spoken up. You left your colleagues, so why not challenge them sooner? Were you afraid of damaging your career? That's a fair question. I was about 24 and in an abusive relationship at home, which may have affected my judgment. I was simply doing a job and trying to keep peace. It may not sound noble. If it were me today, I might consult another lawyer or quit the day I learned about the confession rather than seeing it through trial. I was a labor lawyer for some time. We had a strict no exceptions policy against using company credit cards for personal expenses. Everyone knew it meant termination because the policy was drilled into us through frequent training and signed agreements. We fired an employee a few months from retirement for filling his car with gas on the company card because he forgot his personal card and was about to run out of fuel. His union filed for arbitration. Arbitration is often ineffective. No arbitrator would usually uphold such a termination, even if the employee wasn't close to retirement. However, we won because the pension rules meant if he left before 55, he would face a large pension reduction, hundreds of thousands of euros. On the other hand, I saw many employees do crazy things, hiding and sleeping at work for 40 hours straight, causing a 30,000-gallon gasoline spill or dealing with death threats, yet all got their jobs back through arbitration. I worked at a large law firm that won the release of a suspected terrorist who likely committed a serious crime, but politics interfered with convicting him. Sorry, I can't specify the case. Was he from Saudi Arabia or linked to that region? Not Saudi Arabia exactly, but from that general part of the world. It was a difficult period when many people did not want to handle that case, but since money was involved and employees had no say in decisions, we proceeded. The only advantage of seeing evidence firsthand rather than reading about it in the media is that you can discern what truly happened rather than sorting through conflicting reports. On a lighter note, I recall a trainee once assigned the task of printing out an entire case for his supervising lawyer. The case file was massive, around 300,000 pages of A4 paper. As you might guess, the printer broke down before he could finish. I handled a misdemeanor stalking case once. My client wanted a jury trial, so we proceeded. I had to question the young woman who was being harassed by the defendant. After deliberation, the jury returned a not guilty verdict. My client turned to me in disbelief and said, "They found me not guilty." Yes, that was the outcome. It was frustrating. Having served as a juror myself, I remember a case where most jurors believed the victim's compliance implied consent, simply because the accused did not brandish a weapon or force her to run away. I tried to explain that threatening someone into compliance is still coercion, but many insisted he needed to show a weapon and she needed to try to escape first. That was horrifying. I also served on a grand jury, where we decide whether cases proceed to trial. During my 12 days there, I heard over 20 cases daily. Only 4 or 5 remain memorable to me. Unfortunately, one case I couldn't persuade the other jurors to advance. This case and a few others still weigh on me at night. Thankfully, when I followed the other cases to trial, all the defendants were convicted. But it still bothers me deeply that this particular suspect went free. People's lack of empathy is baffling. Why is it so difficult for some to imagine themselves in the victim's position, scared for their life? Reading comments like these makes me want to scream. To be clear, in the case I mentioned, both the police and the prosecution strongly supported the victim. The issue was solely with the grand jury. Our grand juries, like regular juries, are composed of ordinary citizens from the community. Another sticking point for the jurors was that the victim knew the accused. They had communicated via Snapchat. Some jurors argued that because of their acquaintance and messages, she should have known he wouldn't harm her. Others speculated they had consensual sex and she regretted it, thus later claiming assault. This made the case even more frustrating, because based on the facts, the verdict should have been straightforward. Obligatory disclaimer: not a lawyer, but my brother, who is a lawyer, once mentioned he regrets winning an assault case where the client received a suspended sentence, rather than a harsher penalty like assault causing bodily harm. That client later committed murder. Situations like these leave lasting regrets. I used to mostly handle divorces, which wasn't really my calling, but it was the work available after law school. A man once came to me for a divorce case. He seemed perfectly reasonable and claimed they had $50,000 cash in their safe, which his wife allegedly took when she left. Since the wife never worked, it seemed plausible she took the money to start over or pay bills. 6 months into the process, as we neared property settlement, the husband's true nature emerged. He refused to let his ex-wife have a toaster and argued against giving her anything, even though she hadn't worked during their 15-year marriage. He told her she could take half of the expensive plants she cared for only if she collected them herself without help. For context, these plants were housed in a greenhouse, some weighing over 100 pounds, while she was a very meek woman in her 60s, likely weighing around 100 pounds herself. Eventually, the other lawyer and I settled everything except for the $50,000. The husband insisted his wife took it. The wife admitted she initially took the money, but claimed she returned it on her lawyer's advice. So we took that issue to trial. During the trial, I aggressively cross-examined her elderly parents, treating them as hostile witnesses. I had to hold my own against a veteran attorney with over 30 years' experience while I was brand new. I wanted to prove my competence. In the end, the judge ruled that the $50,000 was lost. Sometimes in legal cases, no one truly wins. For example, 1 hour after winning a case, my client walked into the office and paid his $15,000 bill entirely in $100 bills. I just stared silently at the money while he smiled, thanked me for my help, and left. That moment stuck with me so much that I quit practicing law 3 months later. I still think about his ex-wife, who seemed genuinely kind, and I hope she's doing okay. The significance of the cash payment was that it was unusual for someone to have that much cash on hand, which made me suspect that he probably still had the $50,000 in question. Of course, I can't be certain. People can be petty and unpleasant. However, without more information, it's hard to tell the full story. She might have been toxic or abusive in other ways, and this could have been retaliation. Watching their interactions, though, it felt more like he was the problem, given his temper and behavior and how often she cried during meetings. You never really know what happens behind closed doors. In another case, we took a copyright dispute to trial twice and then an appeal, winning every time. The case was on contingency, meaning the client only paid if we won. After years of legal battles, we have a judgment for nearly $1 million in our fees, but the defendant cleverly hid assets through LLCs, received cash and services off the books, and avoided banks. Sadly, the defendant died from COVID-19 recently, likely having evaded probate, meaning we will probably never get paid, neither our fees nor the client's judgment. Despite winning 3 times, the case has been a financial loss for us. As a lifelong public defender, I rarely let the accusations against a client affect my feelings about them. I've worked with accused murderers and petty criminals alike. I once got a murder suspect acquitted on a technicality during his arrest, even though I believed he was guilty. I regret that decision because he was almost certainly guilty and a danger to others. He was connected to MS-13 and known for violence. That was about 25 years ago. Many armchair lawyers don't realize that the cases lawyers most wish they had lost are often those where clients failed to pay their bills. Collecting fees can be one of the most stressful parts of legal work. For example, my ex-husband owes his lawyer $16,000, but since he has low income, it's unclear if the lawyer will ever be paid. On the other hand, I once paid $63,000 in attorney fees over 2 years for a custody battle. I'm less upset about the money and more about watching the opposing attorney spin a bad situation into something positive despite overwhelming evidence against her client. I doubt I could defend cases involving children being returned to dangerous situations without feeling deeply conflicted. In another scenario, a client hired IT consultants through another firm that essentially acted like a recruiter but charged fees indefinitely. The client eventually stopped paying, owing $200,000. In New Jersey, to sue for unpaid bills as a consulting firm, you must be licensed. This firm wasn't, but they sued anyway, trying to argue technicalities. We won the case, but the client paid nothing beyond my legal fees. While it made a good story and helped my reputation, it didn't feel great helping someone who was acting badly. As an underling, I had no say in accepting or rejecting the case. When I was an insurance defense attorney, I defended a woman whose car hit a man who injured his neck badly enough to lose his ability to work. From the perspective of my client and her insurance, I did a good job, but the jury only awarded the man his past medical bills, not the much larger compensation he deserved. I felt guilty about that for years. Another tough case involved an undocumented immigrant hired by a farm who wasn't paid, and when he demanded his wages, the farmer reported him to ICE. This man faced felony charges for unauthorized re-entry, but prosecutors didn't want to pursue the case because of bad publicity. There was an ICE agent waiting outside the courthouse, so we hoped that if the man served some jail time, ICE might forget him afterward, and meanwhile, we could try to recover the payment from the farmer. However, as criminal defense attorneys, not immigration or business lawyers, we felt ethically compelled not to let him go to jail if we could avoid it. We filed a procedural motion to dismiss, which succeeded, but then ICE deported him anyway, so he never got paid and couldn't return to the US. That case posed a serious ethical dilemma. Was it better for him to lose his payment and be deported, rather than go to jail? It was one of the hardest discussions I've ever been part of. Ultimately, our role was limited. We couldn't control the bigger system, and our client pled not guilty, and we won the criminal case. Another perspective came from a paralegal I know who worked insurance defense, describing a case where an impaired driver hit a man in a stationary car who was then permanently disabled. Their job was to minimize the payout, which made the paralegal question continuing in that work. I also represented a foreign medical company that held a monopoly on a cancer treatment. After a pricing dispute with hospitals, they faked a shortage of the treatment's components, halting production worldwide and dooming many patients. Though they faced criminal and civil charges, I helped reduce their penalty to a minor fine that was less than 0.01% of their profits. I knew a defense lawyer in Florida who defended a teacher accused of molestation. Although he realized the client was guilty during testimony, he aggressively undermined the victim's credibility and secured a not guilty verdict. This win brought him a lucrative job offer in New York City, but also personal tragedy. His wife was institutionalized, and his new boss was a nightmare. I also recall a woman visiting my multicultural class in college who shared a story about defending a multi-million-dollar condo building in a case involving a door issue, illustrating how diverse and complex legal battles can be. A lawyer I once heard about shared a grim story that stuck with me. She defended a multi-million-dollar condo building accused in a case where meth addicts had broken in, raped, and imprisoned a woman for several days. Somehow, the defense spun the story to make it sound like the victim was into crazy sex, and the condo building won the case. That ended up being the last private sector case she took before switching to pro bono and public defense work because she hated what she'd done and wanted to make amends with society. Listening to her talk about the slimy things she'd done made me realize that if you ever need legal help, get an attorney and then never deal with another one on your own. Another case I worked on involved representing a homeless man the government wanted to take custody of to force him into rehab, a rare move given how expensive and difficult forced institutionalization is. This man had been masturbating outside windows and stealing packages, and the neighbors pushed the city to act. Despite the strong public pressure, it felt like the city was only going through the motions to say, "We tried." The man wasn't. Forced into rehab, and instead went on a victory lap, continuing his public indecency, which led to an angry father kicking him. The homeless man then sued the father in civil court, won damages, bought drugs with the money, and was eventually killed while wandering high on a freeway ramp. If we had won that custody case, one man wouldn't have taken a plea for beating the homeless man. Two landscapers wouldn't have suffered trauma from running him over, and the homeless man might have gotten clean instead of dying young. It was frustrating that the district attorney never charged him on the indecent exposure charges or offered a plea deal that would have included rehab. It felt like the city didn't want to win, but couldn't look like they were doing nothing, especially with elections coming up. On another note, a friend told me about his father's experience defending a brutal murder case in Pennsylvania decades ago. An elderly woman was raped and killed, and a man with a criminal record was the prime suspect. Police entered his home without a warrant, found evidence, and arrested him. The young lawyer was handed the case fresh out of law school. Although the man never confessed, the lawyer got the evidence thrown out due to the warrantless search, resulting in an acquittal. After the verdict, the defendant privately admitted, "Thank you, I killed her." The lawyer was so horrified he quit criminal law immediately. Over a decade later, the same man died in a police shootout after breaking into a family's home and murdering them. The lawyer broke down, feeling responsible because he had helped free a murderer who went on to kill again. This case, starting in the 50s or 60s and ending in the 80s, was a haunting reminder of the heavy burdens lawyers carry